Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello. You are tuned into a special episode of the Feeling Good podcast. This episode centers on our main guest, Shakur Ross, and his experiences as a former gang member, his time in prison, and how he turned his life around with the help of CBT-based programs such as the Guiding Rage into Power Training Institute, known as GRIP, inside prison. The conversation delves into the impact of childhood trauma, the culture of gang violence, and the importance of empathy and accountability. Shakur recounts his inner transformative journey and the profound impact of restorative justice and GRIP on his life. We'll delve into his personal journey from committing violent crimes and spending time in prison to now facilitating GRIP programs and dedicating his life to helping others transform theirs. We begin the podcast speaking with Kim Gross-Moore, who is both a Buddhist chaplain and the executive director of the GRIP Training Institute. Kim explains the guiding principles of the GRIP program and its profound impact on the people they work with. Kim shares the success they've seen among their program's graduates and discusses the use of cognitive behavioral therapy, theories, and techniques. This episode is not specifically about TEAM-CBT. It's about Shakur Ross sharing his personal story and the GRIP program, a powerful and transformative model that shares many of the foundational theories of cognitive behavioral therapy that are incorporated into TEAM-CBT. We hope you enjoy this special episode of the Feeling Good podcast. Please let us know if you enjoy this type of programming and want more like it. As part of this interview, we're learning about the GRIP Training Institute. I invited Kim Gross-Moore, who is both a Buddhist chaplain and the executive director of the GRIP Training Institute, to give us more details about the training that you offer the people who participate in the GRIP training groups. You call them members of the tribe, right?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, first of all, for having us, and it's nice to be here. And so we do what's the Guiding Rage into Power program in the state prisons in California. We work with incarcerated people who are serving time for having committed serious and violent crimes, and who are really hungry and eager to be able to learn how to live in a different way and be able to earn their freedom and come home. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we've had over 1,200 graduates. More than 670 are now have been released, are out, and are what we call peacemakers on the outside, gone through the intensive GRIP program, which is 104 hours of intensive healing and accountability work. Probably one of the most intensive programs of rehabilitation in the state prisons, and then really go through a transformative journey so that they're peacemakers when they come home.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really amazing. One of the things that you described in the program is that your recidivism rate is really low.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, in the first 10 years, I think it was like 1.2% or something quite low. And we're really proud of that. We know that when people do have access to the tools and teachings and are really given the opportunity to heal and to be accountable for take responsibility for the harms they've caused, as well as be able to be witnessed and seen for the challenges and harms that they experienced, usually in their early lives, that they are able to really be powerful and emotionally intelligent and wise people who can be of service.
Kim, one of the things that we've talked about that's similar between team therapy, which is what this podcast promotes, and what you do in GRIP is in team therapy, we really emphasize homework in between therapeutic sessions. And in addition to the 104 hours in the GRIP program, you're also promoting lots of homework in between sessions, right?
Yeah, thank you for raising that. Yes, that's right. Nobody just gets a pass at graduating. They need to show up, they need to be in all the classes over a course of about a year, and they need to do intensive assignments. We have tools that they practice in between sessions. They have assignments, written assignments that then they process that really gets to the heart of the trauma that they may have gone through as children, as well as writing things like an unfinished business letter or an apology letter to the victim of their crimes. So they do intensive writing assignments as well.
This podcast is about team cognitive behavioral therapy. One of the things I understand is that in GRIP, you do use cognitive behavioral therapy ideas or structure within your program. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. There are various tools that we teach that are rooted in the theories of cognitive behavioral therapy. So a couple that I want to lift up. One is just fundamentally that we talk about there's a difference between a reaction and a response. And so that much of the violence that people have often caused by a blind reaction. And so what we're inviting people to do is really work to pause, to stretch out the distance between that something happens and being able to choose a skillful response. And so that's a reframe what just happened in a way that's skillful. So, for example, one of the tools that we start with in the early part of the course is something called the ID moment, or the moment of imminent danger. And that's that moment between anger and violence, or craving and using, or expectation and reality. And so you notice the first column, anger, craving, and expectation, is an inner reaction, inner experience, and then anger to violence, craving to using, or actions or behaviors. And so the ID moment, what we invite is for people to catch themselves, oh, this is an ID moment, and now to have a tool to be able to choose a different response. And so the tool that we teach primarily to do at that point is something called SETA, sensations, emotions, thoughts, and actions. And so something can happen in your environment. Somebody cuts you in the chow line, you don't get a call, or you try to call somebody at home and they don't answer, somebody's not around that you're connecting to. And so you have something happens, startles you, upsets you. Instead of just reacting blindly, you take a moment to you go through sensations, emotions, thoughts, and then action. That's the SETA tool. So we invite people to slow down, to notice, go into their bodies, their somatic experience. What are the sensations that are happening in their body right then when that person cut you in the chow line? And then what are the emotions that come up? And then what are the thoughts? And then the actions. And particularly, I think, in terms of CBT, what might be relevant here is that when you're looking at your thoughts, that it really is liberating to learn to realize that, oh, I don't have to believe these thoughts. I can name them. Like, I had a thought when this guy cut me off, like, you idiot, or how could you do this, or I'm going to get you, or whatever the thought is. Oh, I don't have to believe these thoughts. I don't have to give them authority. I actually can choose something else. And so that's really empowering. There's another tool that we also use that's relevant here called Q-tip. That's quit taking it personal. I love that one, and I think our students really love it because it's so graceful and so empowering also, because so much about something happens, we react, we get angry, we get upset, we're hurt, we're ashamed, we're embarrassed because this guy just cut us off. Everybody's looking at you like, are you going to let that happen? We think it's all about us. We think it's like, oh, I've just been disrespected. I look weak. This guy thinks he can get away with it. Whatever those things are, that's all about me and being disrespected. And the Q-tip reframe is when you can say, oh, this isn't about me. This is maybe something is going on in this other person's life that means he really he had a bad day, and I'm going to it's okay for him to get food before me. Or maybe he just got some bad news and I'm going to just wish him well and I can walk away from this. So those are some ways that we teach and then practice some what I think would be aligned with what you're talking about with TEAM-CBT. Is that true?
Yes, that is very true. Because what you're talking about really is identifying the thoughts that lead someone to do something that they regret later, and then looking to see what the cognitive distortions are, reframing it, and then making a more informed choice about what they could do.
Yeah, because you just mentioned the cognitive distortions. I think another one that is really fundamental in GRIP is the all or nothing way of thinking that really can be such a distortion and keep people in boxes that really constrain human potential, constrain us as human beings, when all people are considered to be is an offender or a prisoner or an inmate, or all they're considered to be is a victim or a survivor, or that then we keep people labeled and really small. And so from early on, we talk about you are not your crime. And we never use language around, like, we don't call people murderers or sex offenders or even offenders, because it's like, you are not this. That is not all of you. And if you're going to be able to take responsibility for the harm you've caused, there's got to be a way to recognize that you are not the worst thing you ever did. You are bigger than that, and take responsibility for what you did so that you can be fully accountable and actually then be of service. And the same thing with when we do survivor work, we do a lot of work around victim impact and empathy work, that it's like, nobody is just a survivor or a victim, and nobody is just an offender. We're complicated human beings. We've all at some level experienced harm, and there's ways that any one of us has caused harm. And so how do we all do this work around healing those parts of us that have been harmed, and take responsibility for the harms that we continue to have perpetrated. And so I think that kind of distortion of all, it's very black and white, can really be, we work to break that down so that we can really see each other's humanity.
Well, we're going to interview Shakur Ross, who's a graduate of your program and now a facilitator of GRIP, the GRIP programs, both inside, and I understand he does a lot of restorative justice work outside of prison. And I think that at the end of this podcast, people are going to be really curious about if there's something that they could do to learn more about the GRIP program or to support the GRIP programs. What could someone do if they want to support the GRIP program?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's just wonderful if anybody is curious to learn more about a different way of violence prevention and repairing of harm, that restorative justice is such a powerful alternative way of imagining, instead of the traditional punishment criminal justice system that really is about punishment. So first, I would just encourage people, if they're curious, to learn about restorative justice. And there are ways on our website that you could do that, or reach out to folks at GRIP to educate yourself if you're curious. We also are always looking for people who might have special skills or talents if they want to volunteer for GRIP or make a financial contribution. We actually are raising money right now to be able to support our ability to bring the GRIP program to a women's prison for the first time. So we'll be starting a Guiding Rage into Power tribe at the largest women's prison in California this fall. And if anybody's interested in supporting that, we'd we'd love supporters, and our website is www.grip-traininginstitute.org. And we'd love to both be able to support anybody's ongoing learning or welcome people as supporters.
Thank you. And I'll put that GRIP, GRIP -traininginstitute.org. I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Rhonda.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you. It's put things in context for me, hearing about the specifics of what you're doing in GRIP. And now we're going to turn to the interview with Shakur. Welcome to the Feeling Good listeners around the country, across the world. I've started to say throughout the galaxy. We have a very special guest, as all our guests are special. His name is Shakur Ross. And before I introduce Shakur, and then let him take over, I'm going to read an endorsement that we got regarding episode 356, where I talked about my failed 5 secrets attempt, and then the closeness we achieved when I made a second, more heartfelt attempt the next day with my daughter-in-law. And this is from Joel Zeff. And he wrote, "Shalom, Rhonda. I just finished listening to your latest podcast. Your sharing of the episode with your daughter-in-law was just gut-wrenching. I felt my tears mingle with yours, together with the stream of tears shed by thousands of other listeners. I happen to be having a conflict with one of my sons right now. I hurt his feelings, and I apologized. I tried to use the 5 secrets, but it was unsuccessful. Listening to you made me think and rethink. I'm sure my efforts fell flat because I still feel fundamentally justified in my critique of him, and that his taking offense in such a deep way was not warranted. Your sharing may salvage my already tense relationship with my son. I'm profoundly grateful for you for opening your heart so honestly for many thousands to hear. I know your heartfelt honesty is going to lead to much healing of the horrible pain of interpersonal conflicts. The Talmud says, words from the heart enter the heart. Your words from the heart have entered my heart, and I am absolutely sure that many, many others share this sentiment. With the deepest affection and gratitude, Joel."
Thank you very much for that beautiful statement and for your wonderful contribution at podcast 356, Rhonda, and every podcast.
Thank you. Okay, well, now I would love to introduce Shakur Ross. Our Feeling Good podcast is dedicated to team therapy, which has been created by David Burns. Today, we're pivoting to interview Shakur Ross, who changed his life in part via cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that he learned in the GRIP Training Institute. And GRIP stands for Guiding Rage into Power. Many of the concepts of the GRIP program are based on the foundations of team therapy without really knowing it, which we hope to draw out today. GRIP students learn to stop violent actions, cultivate mindfulness, develop emotional intelligence, and understand victim impact through the development of empathy. When I was 12 years old, someone close to me was raped. So I've lived with the awareness that the world is a violent place almost all of my life. I have dedicated my work life and lots of things in my personal life to making the world a safer place. And our guest, Shakur Ross, has made the same commitment. Shakur and I met at GRIP's 10th anniversary fundraiser and celebration, and I was so impressed with him, I invited him onto the podcast. He's here to teach us about the power of changing your belief system and showing us how changing his belief system changed his life. Shakur, when we met at that GRIP function, it was very clear to me that you're truly living out your goals in both your work and your personal life, and I really celebrate you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So Shakur Ross was paroled in 2022 after being imprisoned for over 36 years. In 2012, Shakur helped launch the radio program at San Quentin, producing stories for the radio KALW 91.7 FM in San Francisco. Shakur is now teaching audio storytelling and journalism workshops for formerly incarcerated people, and he continues to be a podcaster. In 2017, Shakur received an award for excellence in journalism by the Northern California chapter of the Society for Professional Journalism, of which he continues to be a member. He also earned an AA degree in general studies at Patton College, and he graduated as class Victorian in 2019. Other of Shakur's achievements include training and experience as a peer health educator, a circle keeper at the Restorative Justice for Oakland program, a fundraiser, and a restorative justice practitioner. Since his release, Shakur has traveled to Norway to learn about that country's prison system, and he's traveled to Ghana as a tourist. He's a graduate, like I said before, of the GRIP Training Institute, and the GRIP Training Institute works directly with incarcerated people, offering the participants the opportunity to both understand and transform their violent behavior and replace it with an attitude of mindfulness and emotional intelligence. While the GRIP program doesn't follow TEAM-CBT specifically, a lot of its foundation is based in cognitive behavioral therapy, teaching participants to change their belief systems in order to make personal and systemic change, to turn their violence and suffering into opportunities for learning and healing and growth. Shakur continues to return to San Quentin and also to Soledad Prison as a group facilitator and mentor. So I want to welcome you, Shakur.
Yes, thank you. It's an honor to be here. And wow, I didn't know that I did all those things. Thanks for the reminder.
Cool. Yeah. So Shakur, most people, once they're released from prison, they never go back. And yet you go back 3 times a week.
Well, actually, I go back to facilitate 3 programs, one in San Quentin once a week. And then I go to Soledad to facilitate two groups, tribes down there. And that's just once a month.
Oh, I see. Okay. But still, most people, when they're released from prison, never go back, never want to go back, never turn around and look. Why do you return so frequently? Why do you return to work with incarcerated people?
Well, one of the things that I tell people is I come back in because I know the way out. And the way out, a phrase that we use in GRIP, is by sitting in the fire, burning clean, leaving nothing but ashes. And so what that means is when those moments of reactivity or internal trigger is taking place, a person can allow themselves to tap in with their body sensations, with their thought processes and emotions, and know that it eventually that it will pass. And they will be on the other side of that trigger or that emotion, right? Yes. But anyway, yeah, so okay. I go back in because I know the way out.
Okay, cool. So Shakur, you're here today. You've graduated from the GRIP program and lots of other types of therapy. And you're returning, you're healing, you're working with Oakland youth. You're doing a lot of restorative justice work. I'm kind of assuming you didn't always live that way. And I was wondering if you would be willing to tell us your own personal journey, your backstory, and also your journey toward healing.
Sure. Do we have enough time?
I think we do.
Okay. I'll start by saying I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles to a family of 5, well, family of 7, which included 4 siblings, and I'm being the 4th of 5. I was raised in a 2-parent household by my father, who's a Baptist minister, and my mother, who's a nurse. I can say that over the years, I've had an opportunity to do a lot of processing of my childhood traumas and just being able to connect the dots in terms of what motivated me to do some of the horrible things that I've done in the past, which isn't to say that I had a choice when I committed the crimes that I committed, but I think it's important to be able to go back and look at what were these different factors in my life. Like, I just wasn't, I wasn't born with a gun. I wasn't born violent, right? So I think it's important to be able to track that and understand that as well. So I can say throughout my childhood that I've experienced emotional neglect. I've experienced sexual violence. I've experienced physical violence, and I've experienced gang violence prior to the age of 13. In terms of the sexual violence that I've experienced, on my way to school as a 6 years old, I was kidnapped, taken to a gas station bathroom where I was molested.
I'm sorry you went through that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. But the thing is that I didn't tell anybody about that experience, or I didn't even have an opportunity to process that until I was like 47 years old in 2012 when I went to San Quentin. So I experienced sexual violence on multiple occasions. I experienced it from an extended family member between the ages of 8 and 9. And I also experienced it from a neighbor when I was 12 years old. And I didn't have an opportunity to process it or understand it until I was able to eventually do the work in 2012. In terms of the physical violence, so in my upbringing, in my family household, my father is a Baptist minister. One of the things I learned is that it was important to go back and look at also the parental traits, or to try to have understanding, compassion, and empathy for my parents, to go back and look at the things that may have impacted their lives, that may have been traumatic. Unfortunately, I didn't get an opportunity to ask them about that when they were alive. But over the years, I've had opportunity to speak to various family members to get a better understanding about my parents. But I think it's important to understand how my parents has impacted my life as well. So one of the things I would like to share about my dad is that he was born in 1914. So he was 17 years older than my mom. He was born in Mississippi, Alabama. So if you can just imagine what it's like for a young Black child who eventually becomes a teenager and an adult to be raised in down South Mississippi.
Yeah, I'm sure he experienced a lot of racial violence.
Yes.
Would you say?
Yeah, I would. Yes. And also, my father, he was a World War II veteran, and he was captured and he was tortured during the war. At least that's what I was told by some of my family members. And another thing I think is really important to understand about some of the things that my dad experienced is that he has lost 3 wives and 3 sons. The first wife and son that he lost was given childbirth, during childbirth. The second wife and son he lost was in a car accident. And the third wife and son he lost was as a result of a gang-related murder, which took place in retaliation for a murder that I committed back in September of 1985. So just to give you a little understanding of my father, he was a Baptist minister and a barber by trade, and his motto was spare the rod, spoil the child. So I would literally get these whippings, these spankings, these beatings, or whatever you want to call them, for something like playing in the church's parking lot during services. So when I got home, I would get these beatings, right? And I didn't really understand why I would be getting whipped for playing like a child. So I began to resent church and authority and so on and so forth. So anyway, that was one of the processes of growing up where I felt that I wasn't understood and no one understood me, and that I internalized being bad and shame and all of that comes with not processing different traumas that occurred in my life. So I definitely couldn't go to my dad and complain to him about or talk to him about some of the experience I experienced as a child, when knowing that, okay, this is something that I did bad and I'll get in trouble for it, even though it was some things that had, boundaries were crossed on my end, like people crossed my boundaries, and I didn't know how to deal with that as a child, but just to internalize it and move through life. My mother, on the other hand, one of the things that I think I learned about my mother that a cousin told me. My mother, she was born in Alabama in 1940, 30. My mother was born in Alabama. I think I got those years right. And I was told by one of her cousins that when her mother died, at the funeral, my mother made an attempt to jump into the grave with her mother. And my cousin told me that she had never seen any display of emotion like that before or since. Afterwards, my mother was raised by my grandfather, her father, on a farm in Alabama. So I take it from that. My mother wasn't a very like in terms of being able to track her emotions, in terms of things of that nature. So to give you an example, there would be sometimes when she would probably be in her living room reading a book or a paper, and I would come in seeking her attention, and only to get an angry, "You're getting on my nerves," animated response. "You're getting on my nerves." And so I would cringe on the inside, knowing that my mother loved me, but also feeling unloved as a child. Also, growing up, there's so many other different factors that I'm not even going into, right? Okay. That I can share with you that impacted my home life with my sisters and my brothers that were traumatic. But another one I'll share with you as it relates to gang activity is that my older brother is 7 years older than me. We shared a room. When I was 11 and he was 17, 18, he was jumped on by some gang members who hit him in the mouth with a baseball bat, knocked his teeth out. And my family ended up moving him to live with relatives in Alabama, with some of my mother's relatives, right? Now, I was 11 years old. All my life, I had known my brother. My brother, he was almost like my dad. I mean, he was the one who was there all the time. And I shared a room with him. And for him to be out of my life, and no one really explained to me why he was out of my life, other than he had got this horrible, incident that occurred. So when I was 13 years old, when I was coming home from school, I was approached by 3 young men who began harassing me, asking me what gang I was from. And when I told them I wasn't in the gang, they didn't attempt. They robbed me of my food and attacked me. So I ended up trying to fight back. I ran away. But at that point, I decided that, hey, I'm not going to go for this. I began looking in my environment more closely, looking at the different gangs, and I decided to join the gang. And at that point, when I joined the gang at 13 years old, I would tell you that my life spiraled out of control, totally out of control. And that it was just like, I can tell you, it was to have teenagers experiencing similar traumas and situations in our lives. And it was like a concoction for disaster, for violence, where my validation as a person began to show up from my peers who were in the street, who were gang members. And so I took on those values, that belief system, and that culture beginning at 13. And just to give you an idea of how it played out in my life, like I began being arrested as a juvenile for attempted robbery. I attempted to snatch a woman's purse after being egged on by some of my older homeboys, wanted to be a part of that. Stolen cars and things of that nature. Began to go into juvenile hall. I went to camp. I did time in youth authority. Throughout that process, when it comes to school, I could tell you in elementary school, I used to get swats. I was acting out in class. I was kicked out of 7 different junior high schools before being kicked out of Los Angeles Unified School District altogether and sent to an all-boys school in East Los Angeles called Jackson High at the time. I was kicked out of school for things like getting smart with the teacher, gambling, leaving school without permission, leaving class without permission, being threatened by other gang members. It was a variety of things that I was expelled for, and it didn't seem like I was experiencing anybody's empathy or anybody's compassion. And that sort of fed into the belief that you don't care about me, I don't care about you. F you, F me, F you. And it just added to this image that I was creating for myself that was just pretty much based on fear. So I had this image, this hardcore image that all the other systems fed. You don't care about me, I don't care about you. So I can tell you that I ended up going to like youth authority. And the thing is, one of the things that I learned about myself is that I had this knack for wanting revenge. Like, if you do something to me, I have to get you back. Or I got to get you before you get me. So that became my mentality. That became my belief. That caused me to hurt a lot of people just with the thought that I'm not going to be victimized. I'm going to victimize you first. And as a gang member, I took on that mentality and that culture, and it also included that. So what I'm saying is I was involved in a lot of violence growing up.
Yeah. And you didn't experience any empathy or compassion from any of the systems you were in.
Yes, I didn't. And I can just to give you a more in-depth understanding of what that looked like growing up in South Central was, can you imagine what it's like to come outside my house, have to look around every corner, every car that drives down the street, wondering if they're going to stick a rifle or a handgun out the car, or whether a group of guys are going to jump out and jump you. That happened to me before too. And I've also did it to others. But I just want you to understand, like, it's important to understand, like, that type of environment where there's just constant violence. And it's just, I understand that I had choices to make. And unfortunately, I got involved in that gang-related culture. And it was very predatory, right? And I ended up just terrorizing my community, basically like the Tasmanian devil. But I can tell you that today it feels good to be on the other side of that. And I can tell you that that journey didn't come easy. Mm. So just to tie things up so you can understand, like, the incarceration journey. So I went to camp for a crime that I didn't commit.
And so camp is like a medium secure facility
for juveniles.
For juveniles.
It's county camp, right? It's like you go on probation, it's county. I went to camp as a result of a bike that was stolen. The bike was stolen, and we were over some of my peers' house, and we were going to go to the store. And so I got one of the bikes that was outside of the house, and I rode it to the store. And as I was riding this bike to the store, a black and white car pulled over, drew a weapon on me. They had some guy in the back seat that told them that I had taken that bike, but I hadn't taken that bike. Hmm. Somebody may have taken the bike, but it wasn't me.
Yep.
Well, anyway, he had told the police that he went inside a liquor store, and when he came out, that I was sitting on his bike, and that when he asked for his bike, that I raised up my shirt to show him the butt of a gun and rode away on his bike. That wasn't me. But anyway, I went to camp for that. And so when I got out of camp about a year later, I saw this guy. He was driving down the street, driving through an alley, and I had a weapon on me, and I took a couple of shots at him. And I did that because I wanted revenge, because of the gang-related culture. You can't let anybody get away with snitching on you, and the belief that I brought into the gang culture belief system. So I ended up going back to youth authority after being out only a month and a half for an assault with a deadly weapon.
And youth authority is the California prison for children. So it's a higher security facility.
Right. And now you're dealing with parole,
right,
as opposed to probation, right? So I did approximately 3 years in youth authority. And I could tell you that I didn't really learn too much of anything. It was just a place where criminality was just promoted in terms of the young men that were there. Like this was just somewhere to continue on in the gang-related culture.
So again, was there no empathy or training or counseling or compassion for you at the Youth Authority?
I can tell you that to some degree there was. I did manage to get my high school diploma there, and I managed to become certified in landscaping. And there was some degree of counseling there, right? So I want to name that, but I also, in terms of the gang-related culture that was there, it had more of an influence on me personally. Okay. I hadn't did any form of rehabilitation, any form of looking back in my past. I hadn't seen any psychologists in any shape, form, or fashion, right? I just went through the system. Everything that I experienced, I was on my own from a boy up to, at this point, a teenager who had went through camp, Youth Authority, right? And now I'm out on the streets. So there was no form of rehabilitation when I got out in 1984, right? I did have an ideal that I don't want to go back to prison, but I had no way of even understanding of what motivated me to commit my crimes in the first place. I had no way of understanding why I was utilizing alcohol and smoking marijuana daily. So anyway, I want to say that I just continued to operate in this gang-related culture. And when I was approached by a rival gang member on September the 7th of 1985 in a liquor store in my neighborhood, I went outside, I grabbed a weapon, and when he came outside, I shot him 5 times and I murdered him. But initially, what I was telling everyone, my legal defense, what I was telling my family, what I was telling my friends, and anybody who would listen to me, was that him and one of his homeboys had came into a liquor store, and when I went out the liquor store, we had a conversation around gang-related activity. When I went out the liquor store, he followed me out the liquor store and pulled a weapon, and the struggle ensued for the weapon, and I took the weapon and shot him with the weapon. That was the story and a lie that I was telling people for years, right? And so after I shot and murdered Stanford, I won't say his last name, 4 days later, my mother and little brother were killed in retaliation.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes, my 15-year-old brother, David, and my mother, who was 54 years old at the time, they were killed in retaliation. And I can tell you that definitely had a profound impact on me.
I'm sure.
Yes. And I can tell you that I was arrested 4 days later, September the 15th, 1985. And I'm grateful that I was arrested then because I was at my wit's end and I really didn't even care anymore, whether I lived or died. The only thing I cared about at that point was carrying on this image that, okay, now I have to retaliate. You did this to me, now I got to go and do this to you, right? So that was my mentality prior to my arrest. So had I not have been arrested, I can definitely tell you that I would have went out and committed more crimes, more heinous crimes towards this particular gang. So I'm glad that for the sake of my own soul, that I was arrested, and that I didn't go out and perpetrate any more crimes after that. But I can tell you that was also a pivotal point in my life, because when I was in a holding cell on my arrest in the substation, in the police station, and all of the drugs and alcohol that began to wear off. And I was sitting with myself, and I realized what really had happened with my mother and little brother. I decided that since they had died for me, that I was going to live for them, that I wasn't going to continue going down this path. And it gave me an opportunity to really look at and understand all the hurt and harm that I caused so many others. And so I knew what that felt like now. Mm. And I did know that I didn't want to be violent no more. I didn't. But that was no longer the death style that I was living. But in my heart and mind, I didn't want to be violent anymore. And so I decided at that point that to solidify that I would that I would have to strengthen myself mentally, physically, and spiritually. And what I did that day was, the physical aspect was, I decided that I was going to rest, that I would exercise, I would work out for the rest of my life. And so I did 300 push-ups that day, and I have continued to honor that today in terms of mentally, physically, and spiritually living for my mother, my brother, right, in their honor. So
your brother and your mother's murder through the retaliation of this gang, that is what gave you the motivation to change?
Initially, but I didn't know how to change. Mm-hmm. I didn't know. I mean, I was in a prison environment where I was thrown into these violent institutions, and there was no rehabilitation taking place. There weren't any programs taking place, so there was a lot of racial violence going on. A lot of it just at that point in time, I was pretty much, I would say, wanting to change, not really knowing how. Actually, I was afraid of violence. I was afraid to be violent because I feared that I would lose myself in violence and not be able to come back. Mm. I just had this image of myself because of the death style that I lived, right? And the image that I perpetrated, right? That I wanted everybody to see and buy into, this hardcore image. I would do these things so people can see me and say, no, don't mess with him.
He's scary, don't mess with him.
Yes. And that was the reputation that I created for myself over the years throughout the schools and the juvenile systems and the state systems, that I'm not to be messed with. And so now I felt that I probably had to do something really above just to prove that I'm still this violent cat. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. But in my mind's eye, that if I did this, I had visualized myself literally possibly eating someone's guts. Just the fear that if I lose myself in this violence, that I would not be able to come back. And I didn't want to lose myself in that. And so I feared being violent. Mm-hmm. I also knew that I was in this violent atmosphere and that there was certain expectations, as a person who was involved in gangs and gang activity. And so every prison that I went to initially, people wanted to know where my thought was. What did I want to do? What did I want to do? And so my thought initially, I wanted to retaliate, but I wanted those who were responsible for the deaths of my mother and little brother. And so that put me in a different mind frame. It was no longer about gang banging for me. It was personal now. And being that it was personal, that took me out of the realms of the prison politics, right? What I mean is, I didn't come into prison as this gang member. Now I want to be the shot caller in the prison, and this is what we're going to do. I came in like I'm no longer gang banging, but I want the ones responsible for this. I still identify, right? But I'm not involved in this, and it's personal. So when I would go to these different prisons, being that I was involved in this gang, it was actually, just to give you some context, I think is important. I was involved in the GRIP gang. And as a part of this GRIP gang, there was a rivalry that started with another GRIP gang. And this rivalry resulted in the deaths of my mother and little brother and me committing a murder as well. Mm-hmm. Just so you know, this was infighting between Crips. Mm-hmm. And so when I went to other prisons, you would have these gang members that would be choosing sides because they associated or affiliated with this us or them.
Right.
So I would go into prison and they would want to know what did I want to do. And I would pretty much say that the ones responsible. That's who I want. And some people, they didn't want to hear that. Like one while they wanted violence. But I was able to take the stance that no, I want those responsible, or anyone who disrespects me, then in my mind, they would get what I want to give to those who are responsible. So that was my mentality. And with that mentality, it allowed me to do things that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to do as an individual in a prison environment.
So Shakur, you've talked about a lot of pain and trauma, loss, both that you've experienced and that you brought to other people. And a lot of it is based on your belief system. Like, you don't care about me. I don't care about you. I have to get you before you get me. You can't snitch on me. The gang belief system.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, can you tell me, how did you get out of that world? How did you change your belief system?
Okay. So initially, I can tell you that when I got to San Quentin in 2012, I attended a restorative justice symposium.
And could you explain to people who don't know what restorative justice means?
So restorative justice is basically, I want to say it's a movement. But restorative justice, the principles, when I think of restorative justice, are empathy, accountability, and amends. Restorative justice allows the ideal that people who caused harm and those who have suffered harm can come together and have some type of dialogue or understanding of what took place in order to heal, right? And so the concept is just not utilized as in terms of victim offender mediation or dialogue. It's also a concept that is utilized in schools and in circle processing and healing journeys for people. And it's about treating survivors, of people who caused harm, and stakeholders in the community equally, right? So I went to this restorative justice symposium, and I was having this dissonance about going at first because I didn't want to talk about criminalization, and I didn't want to talk about victimization, and I didn't know anything about restorative justice. But I had known that my cousin was involved with restorative justice, Fania Davis. So it piqued the interest. So the symposium went from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And I was having this dissonance. I decided that, okay, I'm going to go to the yard. I'm not going to this symposium. So I went to the yard, worked out, came back, took a shower. And about noon, I decided, okay, let me go to the symposium. So I went in late, and they were already broken out into small circles in the Catholic chapels, sitting in the pews and using those folding chairs to create circles. So I sat in one of the pews and I was invited into a circle. And no sooner as I sat inside the circle, they handed me a talking piece. And I looked at it, I didn't understand what they wanted. They said I can pass. I passed the talking piece. It was about 12, 13 people in the circle. And by the time the talking piece made its way back around me, I was open and honest about the crimes I committed for the first time, right? In 27 years, I was 27 years.
Yeah.
First time, I was open and honest. And so it was the looks of empathy as opposed to the looks of judgment on the women's faces inside the circle that had an impact on me. And I decided after that symposium, and it also was like the sacredness of this circle that compelled me to want to be open and honest. And that started my transforming journey in terms of taking accountability for the crimes that I committed and being able to unpack my childhood traumas and understand my triggers and utilize coping skills in order to regulate myself. And then in 2013, I met Jacques Verdon, who founded the GRIP program.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got involved with GRIP. And in 2014, I took the class. I couldn't do it in 2013 because I was in college, and that was my priority at that point, to get the college degree. So it conflicted one of the classes. But anyway, in 2014, I took the GRIP program, and that entire GRIP program was filmed. They filmed that in 2014. So that's footage that we have right now. We're in the process of creating an e-learning project so that the men can access that.
Shakur, the GRIP program, that first restorative justice session that you went to where you experienced empathy, sounds like probably for the first, tell me if this is true, the first time in your life, allowed you to be honest and open with not just the people around you, but with yourself.
Yes. And you want to know something? It just felt so good to be able to get the lie off my chest. And I also want to be clear, right? Not only did I commit a gang-related murder, I also was arrested and charged with sexual assault. And I served time for sexual assault, right? Crimes that occurred prior to the murder that I committed that were filed after my initial arrest.
Yeah.
And that I was in denial about.
Right.
Saying that misidentification, it wasn't me, that the LAPD is using and the DA is using a solvable crime to trump up other false charges. Yeah. All of that was untrue.
One of the things that stands out at your story, and even now as you're telling it, is that you have really let go of blaming other people for your life choices, for the things, like even in your description of your parents, you're talking with understanding and empathically, looking at their lives with compassion. And as you're talking even now, you're taking accountability, and that is a really key component of team therapy. And can you tell us how you were able to let go of blame and take responsibility and be accountable, and throughout that process find acceptance of who you are as a person?
Okay. So initially I had to unpack the shame and guilt. I had to be able to speak to the horrible things that happened to me as a child, as well as the horrible things that I did to other people. And then we do that in it's almost like a crime impact statement, just to so that by being able to go back and look at my childhood traumas, the ideal is that what we teach in GRIP is hurt people, but also heal people, right? So by me having the opportunity to go back and look at my childhood traumas and track them and do different aspects of the curriculum where I'm able to identify like grief. I'm able to heal from different grieving patterns throughout my life, grieving my childhood, or going back and looking at the childhood traumas, right? And being able to track what was this event? What was my thoughts? What was the belief associated with this event? What were my emotions, right? And what was my actions as a result? And being able to understand that and track that really allowed me to, I was able to identify different patterns in my life. And by being able to identify those patterns, I could see them whenever they would arise, those triggers, I want to say, right, with air quotes. So whenever those triggers come up, I learned how to track that, like through my body sensations by what we would call SETA, which is an acronym, which means sensations. So in other words, what sensations are coming up as a result of a particular trigger? Is my heart pounding? Am I feeling hot? Is my eyes watering, right? Am I clenching my jaw? And then you have emotions. What emotion in my experience? Is it anger? Is it fear, right? Then it's the thought. What are my thoughts, right? Being able to track whatever the thoughts is in relation to the trigger. And oftentimes, by tracking my sensations, it allows me to create the space to now I can choose to respond as opposed to react. Because now, for me, it becomes a practice. So now, so why is my heart pounding? So automatically for me, I know that it makes me self-aware, right? And so then you have the actions. Okay, now what is my action? Now I have the ability to create this space to where I can choose to respond as opposed to react. So that's also a process and a tool that I learned through GRIP. But the ideal is, yes, we did have to unpack those childhood traumas, what we refer to as the original pain. The original pain, and then we also would have the secondary pain. By being able to track the original pain, and we can see how, by being able to connect the dots and understanding what motivated my crime without denying accountability, because the ideal is I had a choice. No matter what happened, no matter what happened to me, I had a choice. And I decided to go out and do the horrible things that I did. Right? Just like I have a choice now, and I decide to go out and help people heal from some of the horrible things that I may have caused. If not to the people that I've done it to directly, then maybe to other people who I may be able to help, just with my story, just with what accountability looks, just by being able to express the harm that I caused, my willingness to take accountability, my willingness to talk about it, because I believe that it's really important that we talk about sexual violence, right, in public, that we have these type of dialogues, because I didn't have no outlet or nowhere to talk about it as a child. I didn't have an opportunity to process that. So imagine what it was like for me growing up as a young boy and as a kid, just basically thinking I'm a grown man as a child. I'm just moving through life wherever the wind blows and wherever the emotion goes, whoever would accept me, right? And I can definitely tell you, I can definitely connect to a lot of different aspects and motivating factors into my crime, which we don't really have time to go into now. But I think it's important to understand how those environmental factors, the home, the school, the neighborhood, the church, the law enforcement, how that impacts us, right? So in my community, law enforcement they were like the enemy.
Right.
They would come in, and I felt attacked by them. I can be walking down the street and then I could get harassed and end up on the ground for something I didn't even do.
Right.
So you can imagine. So when I see the police, the immediate response is fear. I'm going to run. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And I may not have even done anything. But I just don't want to be harassed.
And it also sounds like what's coming through from the story that you're telling is that you had this belief system from being engulfed and accepting the gang culture way of looking at life, that belief system, the thoughts that were a part of that. And so your belief system has changed pretty dramatically, and your thoughts about life and thoughts about the events of your life have also changed very dramatically, not just your past life, but how you want to live in the future.
Correct. And what's the question? I'm sorry.
No, I was just making a statement.
Oh, yes.
That you were able through the work through GRIP and the other restorative justice and the other counseling, like you told me when we were talking alone, that you worked with this CBT therapist individually too, and that changing the thoughts about the gang culture allowed you to be who you are today and to go through that healing.
And it's not just the gang role belief system. It's also like the male role belief system, and understanding that and how that impacted me, and toxic masculinity, and how and understanding that, and how understanding misogyny and how that impacted me, and what role that I have in oppressions towards women, like personally. And being able to understand what women have gone through traditionally, the oppression that women have suffered. And so for me, just being able to go back and unpack all these things, it just gave me a greater understanding of who I am as a person, and also who others are as I move through the world. My understanding of other people and other cultures, right? Other religions, different races, and so on and so forth. Like, growing up in my neighborhood, I was disconnected from myself. I wouldn't be able to have these conversations with you. I wouldn't be able to look you in the eye and connect with you. I would be trying to figure out, how can I get over on you? How can I victimize you? How can you not victimize me, but how can I victimize you?
Right. So, David, is there anything you want to ask Shakur, or any points you want to make?
As you're telling your story there, really, really appreciate your openness and talking about the horrible experiences that you've had and how you wanted revenge and eventually decided to go in a different direction. I certainly appreciate hearing your story as a person, as a human being. I have a lot of admiration and respect for you.
Yes.
Shakur.
I definitely would be open to following up so that those points can be clear, because I think it's important, to be able to discuss my past for me in an open and honest and vulnerable manner, right? Just so I can have a better understanding and clarity. And it also helps my healing journey, and also can provide an example for others moving forward what healing may look like.
It's a relief, isn't it?
Yes, it's definitely a relief.
It's a way of getting close to one another, to each other, to be open and vulnerable. And it sounds like that was just like kind of the opposite of, being predatory, out for revenge, trying to protect yourself, like a whole different way of experiencing life and other people.
Yes. But I also want to say, like, in terms of grief, I know we all have our stories, right? So I just want to also share with you just briefly that while I was incarcerated, my son was killed by police in 2018 on January 1st.
Oh my God, Shakur, I'm really sorry. It's horrible.
And also, and he had ran for them. Remember, I told you how, like, just being scared. He ran for them. They tackled him, and they said that he reached for a weapon. They tasered him, and he died as a result. So
so sad, horrible.
You can imagine what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. And then when I got out of prison, his mother's funeral was 2 days later. Just to, I'm just saying that one thing that I learned is I learned how to grieve. I learned how to process my emotions. And I also learned how to develop healthy relationships with men and women. At first, I was distrustful towards men, and I didn't realize how distrustful I was towards women. But I've been able to understand that, and now I'm able to have healthy relationships and friends and family members to model what a healthy masculinity and a healthy femininity looks like, that I can really appreciate as I move through the world.
So Shakur, we have to wrap up pretty soon because it's been about an hour. Are there any upcoming projects that you're working on that you want to tell our listeners about?
Well, I do intend to come out with a podcast really soon, talking about the various forms of violence. So look forward to that. With the co-host, right? So that's definitely something on the horizon.
Nice. I echo what David said. I appreciate you being willing to come onto the podcast and share your story with us, with our listeners. And I'm also really grateful that you've got to the place where you are today, where you were able to change your life around, learn everything that you had to learn, and go through whatever you needed to do to be at a place where you can, I feel like I'm going to start crying, be at a place where you can live a life of happiness and joy and repairing.
Yes.
Reparation. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm going to tell you, I wouldn't have it any other way. It feels so good to be able to, like, touch the lives of other people in ways that I had no idea the impact that I can have on others.
Right.
Yeah. Just being on the other side of the hurt and being able to heal. It's so fulfilling.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing yourself with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.